We're recording. So we're going to go to Mixamo and we're going to figure out how to download an animated model into and import that into Blender. And then we can try to upload our own and see how that goes. So I logged into Mixamo. I guess real quick, if you want to follow along, create an account. and, if you signed into Google, you can just sign into Mixamo with your Google account on the like main page when you go to log in. So if you have a Gmail or whatever and you sign into the browser, it'll just like let you use your Google account, which is what I did. So the first thing you see is a character here. I have this nice man here with cargo shorts. And on the left, we have some animations, and they're using this sort of like blocky posed character, kind of like those, you'll see like posable like life drawing or like reference human figures, but showing different like sort of short loops of animations. We have rifle punch, we have dancing, we have sitting laughing, hip hop dancing, dribble, put the back rifle behind. So some of these, some of these are very like specific towards like gaming, and very specifically violence gaming, where you're like shooting people. But you can search for. There's a lot on here, but above this, above like the sort of like grid, we have a search bar, and through that search, you can also search by genre. Again, this is kind of geared towards people use it for just straight animation, but it's also like heavily used for people doing game development to have very quick sort of like assets. Assets meaning media you can use in your project to sort of prototype stuff or to build games. And so some of these are very specific to fantasy. Like if we click on fantasy, there's like an orc walking. Because of course there's going to be an orc. And then we have some very fantasy looking characters with some fantasy style actions. Got a wizard, that's me. Ready to throw a fireball. Fireball. Combat, sport, dance, fantasy, superhero, skinning test. I don't know what's up with that. But if I just search, I'm just going to get a very basic walk cycle. So I'm going to type in walk. And we have a few different walking animations here. We have zombie. Some are like, wounded, again, violence game scenarios. Some like casual or like I'm about to fight you walking. I'm just going to go with, oh, that one's kind of nice. Maybe I'll do that one. Careful walk. And so when we click on that, that animation is like automatically displayed on our character model in the window to the right. And if you click and drag with the left mouse button, that reminds me I have to set up my mouse real quick. You can change the perspective. If you scroll in and out, it'll zoom. Where'd it go? Primary button, secondary button, button 3. Okay. And if you hold right click and scroll, it zooms. And if you hold down the third button, the mouse wheel button, and drag, it'll let you strafe or change the position of the camera. And so if I don't like this character, up at the top of the page, right now we're at the like animations. Animation like shows like different animations that you can choose. And if you click on characters, there's no walk character, so I'll get that out of the search query. You can see all the different characters they have. And we have some like cartoony ones. We have some zombie ones. It seems like the aesthetic is like I don't know, like marine, zombie, fantasy character, or like some sort of like general city tough dude or something like that. Um, the boss. Use this character. I like the boss. So I'm going to go with the boss. Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the like strategies for using these animations is that like if you already have a character that's doing like a walk motion, then you don't have to animate that. All you have to animate is their body moving around in space. You know?
You can animate them. I mean, you can the modify the motion.
You can modify the motion if you want.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like most people using this like site, using Mixamo, just take the animations that are already in there. You can speed it up or slow it down. If you wanted to fine tune the animations to your liking, you can. It's just kind of tricky. But so like what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this guy to have like a sort of looping, walking action that we can then drop in our scene, and then he'll just be like doing that action forever, and then we can just like move his whole body and keyframe him around the scene. So he'll already be walking, and then we just move him around. Get me? So by default, with this walk animation, you see that he's moving through space. So that part of the animation is baked into this loop. And what we want is we want him to stay in place so we can manually move him around space, if that makes sense. So there's an option. We have a lot of sliders on the right here. There's rates, which I believe is speed. Yeah, I like him. Carefulness. I guess some of these are like sort of contingent on like whatever animation you have. So he's not very careful right now. I want him to be very, very careful. Stride, which is like the length of his step. Overdrive is just sort of like speed, essentially. I'll leave that at 52. Character arm space. I think that's just sort of how far that those arms are away from the body. And then I'm not going to mess with trim. But what we want to do is we want this guy to be walking in place. So when I check in place, we see that he's no longer moving around this like virtual space. If I uncheck it, you can see he's moving. But if we bring him into Blender at this point without checking in place, then when we animate him in the scene, he's just going to be doing this. He's going to and then go back, and then go back like that. That's going to be part of the loop, him moving forward. And that's not what we want. We want to manually make him move forward. So I'm going to check in place so that it's only just like his arm and leg motions and body motions and not any sort of keyframes for him moving around in space. So I like this. I like this boss. He's my boss. I'm going to download him. With skin, 30 frames a second is fine. That isn't very important. You can kind of change this afterwards, but I think leaving it at 30 is good. I found last semester that using FBX is the best format. Collada sometimes works. I mean, it tended to work also, but there were fewer glitches or issues if people just used FBX, which is the default format. So pretty much you just leave everything default. Pardon me. And I'm going to hit download. And it takes a second, and then it downloads. And it's not that big of a file. It's like 4 megabytes, I think. So I'm going to move that to my desktop because I don't know why I don't like to work out of the downloads folder. And I already have Blender open. I'm going to delete this cube. And I'm going to go to File, Imports, and choose FBX, which is the file format that our boss is in. And generally, the file is going to be named. When you download it, it's just going to be named after the animation that you chose. That's like attached to the character. So it's not called boss, it's just called walking. So I'm going to import that. Might take a second. Let's see how it looks. So we see our character. If we go into look dev or rendered mode, we can see if it, I'm going to just save this as Mixamo boss. And I notice that his materials are not showing up. Let me look at this real quick. I'm going to try to download again with skin. And I'm going to try Colada also and see if that changes anything. With skin, yeah. Let's see. Oops. Nope. What? So when I downloaded the Colada file, it came with textures. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop that textures folder that came with the Colada file onto the main desktop. And I'm going to go back to Blender. And so it already has a image file linked, or it sort of has an image file linked to the base color. It just says file 2 for the base color, which is just another term for color. Okay, so it's looking for file 2, and I'm going to I'm just going to X that out. I'm going to start with a new image texture, and I'm going to go to Open, Walking, go to that texture, and I'm going to choose Diffuse. And now that texture is showing up. And if I go to his pants, and then go to the base color and just like check, I'm going to check this like arrow to bring down some options. I'm going to X out that texture. And I think actually what I could do, oh, it already shows it. I could just choose whatever material was linked to the shirt, which is just referencing that image texture. And if I do that for the shoes, close matte, choose the head, choose close material. I'm just going to call this now textured material. Click on the hat, choose textured material, choose the arm, go to textured material. And I could also click on the cigar, the eyeballs, and then click on a material or an object that has the material I want and say object link. I know the shortcut, it's Control L. You can make a link to the materials. But you just choose the object that's like purple and then go to a material that is linked to that texture file, and it should automatically map. It looks like there's a material for his teeth too. Dang. Textured material. Anyways. Okay. I'm gonna save. So to sort of like go over what I just did, I downloaded an FBX file, and that didn't have the materials linked to it. I feel like in the past people were able to get that to work, but you got it to work. The FBX worked.
I just downloaded both of them and it just suddenly worked.
Okay. Probably when you downloaded the Colada one, it came with that texture folder, and if it was like next to that other project or that other model, it was like in the right directory, and it just sort of automatically linked those textures. Who knows? But if you maybe try the Colada file first, and if that doesn't work, just keep the textures and use the FBX, but there's only 2 files, so one of those will work for you. So I have the boss, and he is got his materials, and I'm gonna hit play. And we'll see that it gets to about frame 60 or so, and then it stops. And that's the end of the loop. So it's like a 64 frame loop. And if we click on the armature, and just a refresher on the armature, I'm gonna go into wireframe. The armature is just a set of like virtual bones that are placed inside any object, generally like a human, that are there to control different parts of that body. So we have right here some bones, and this one kind of looks a little weird. They all kind of look different depending on what kind of file you're importing. But we can see a spine in here. There's these like linked bones right here in the center. That's a spine. These right here are for his like upper legs. Then we see some for his foot and lower leg. We can see individual bones for his fingers here, and for his shoulders, arms, all that. And so when I click on that armature, and I look down at our timeline, I see there's a bunch of frames there. We can see our keyframes for that bone structure. And it goes to 64. So if you wanted to like move around one of these bones individually, when you select the armature, instead of going into edit mode like we can with meshes to like change their geometry, there's another option when you click on an armature, and that's pose mode. So if I click on pose mode, now all those bones turn blue, and if I click on an individual bone and I hit rotate, I can now rotate his arm. Again, if I do that and it's all wonky like that and hit play, it's going to go back to the last keyframe position, because if I wanted to keep that sort of rotation, I would have to insert a rotation keyframe. But for this model, I like how it's animated. I don't really need to make any tweaks. I want them to be all sneaky. That's cool with me. So I'm going to go back into object mode. I just wanted to show you how armatures work and how bones relate to different parts of the body and how you can individually tweak them. So I'm going to select the armature. And so the goal here is I'm trying to get all of these keyframes to loop. And one way you can think about doing that, you could be like, oh, I want to copy and paste all these keyframes over and over and over. Whoops. And that could work. I mean, that's one way of doing it. And if I line those up right, so it's like seamlessly transitioning into a loop. But what I feel is the best way to go about this, and it sets you up to be able to transition between this animation and perhaps another animation that the boss could do, is to use a different window we haven't worked with yet. And it's called the NLA editor. So right now we're looking at keyframes through the timeline. And remember, we have the timeline, which shows like a sort of a broad overview of all the keyframes in your scene, and it has the sort of play, rewind, and auto keyframe buttons. And then I'm going to make a new window to give myself more room. So again, I just kind of floated my mouse down at the bottom left corner of my 3D viewport until I got that crosshair, and then I clicked and dragged up. And so we have the timeline, which is the broad view of all your keyframes with the controls. We have the dope sheet, which shows a more outlined, granular, detailed sort of look at everything. And if we look at it in the dope sheet, it's like, oh my God, we got X location, XYZ location, all the rotation, all the scale for every individual bone. That's a lot of keyframes. We don't have to look at them all. I could just sort of like collapse this armature into just one set. And so we have the dope sheet, we have the timeline, but and we also have the graph editor, if you wanted to look at it in there, which kind of shows the expression of all those keyframes. But we want to do a different one. So underneath, when I choose the kind of window I want to look at, underneath dope sheet, timeline, graph editor, under the animation column, the last one is called nonlinear animation, or NLA, some people call it. I'm going to choose that. So the NLA editor is a way to take a block, like a group of keyframes you already have, and sort of turn them into sort of like a video clip. So it's like working with animations as though it's like a clip in Premiere. So you don't have to think about individual keyframes. You're thinking about that animation as a set that you can then alter and move around, which is a lot cleaner way of moving or dealing with animation keyframes with something like this that is very complicated, but it's already refined and it's done. And so you don't need to make any tweaks at this point, and you just want to either repeat that set of actions or slow them down or speed them up or like move them at different points in the timeline. So when we look at the NLA editor, it looks similar to kind of like the dope sheet, except we have this sort of block here and we have little black dots showing that there are keyframes in there. And the first thing I always do when I'm going to take a set of keyframes and turn them into a NLA block is I rename it. So if I double click over here, I'm just going to call that sneak. Hit enter. And so now we have a name for this block of animation keyframes. And next to sneak, over here on the left, there is a little icon that's like a down arrow with like two little blocks. Clicking on this will turn all these keyframes into one sort of like animation clip block, kind of like in Premiere. So if I click on that, now we have a strip that's just called sneak, and I can move it forward and back in time. So if I wanted to start like way over here, I could do that. Or I'm going to move it back to the beginning. And if we go to the right side of our window, again, generally every window has like more options on the right with that tiny little arrow. If you click on that, again, N, as in Nancy on the keyboard, pulls up those extra options in any window. So I'm going to bring up my extra window here, and I'm going to look at what we have. Animation data, active track, active strip. That is not really important to me. What is important is playback settings. So we have a couple cool settings here. We have scale and repeat. So if I click and drag on the repeat value, it grows that animation loop. And we have these little white hash lines that mark the end of that initial length. So that's like the loop right there. And there's another mark where the loop starts again. Right now it's at 2.9, so it's not quite a full three times loop. I'm going to just type in 10. And now we have that action repeating 10 times. So if I go to the beginning and then hit play, we can see that he is going through that loop for as many times as I want him to, which is now 10 times. If I were to now adjust the scale, I'm going to save real quick. Now it's 5. So the higher the number is in scale, the slower the motion is. Theoretically, you're supposed to be able to keyframe this, but it never works for me. So if I did 0.5 scale, much faster. I'm going to leave it at scale 1. So now we have our boss dude looping through this walk action. And again, crucial that you check in place for something like a walk action. If I would have had this unchecked and downloaded it with him going through space, then he'd be going like through every loop. He'd be moving forward incrementally and then returning to his original position with every loop mark. So it's important that you download them in place to have that box checked right here. So now that he's looping through this motion, I can now move him through space. And I don't have to be in the NLA editor at this moment to do that. I can go to the dope sheet. So I'm going to go to frame 1. I'm going to go to my camera, and maybe I'll have him walk in and out of frame. So I'll have frame 1. I'm going to move him off camera here. I'm going to hit I to insert a keyframe and choose location. And then I'm going to go to like frame 180. And then I'm going to move him forward. And we'll see how that works in terms of timing. I'm going to hit another keyframe. So if you notice, his motion, the way he's walking, he's moved like my keyframes for him are a little too fast. He looks like he's just sort of gliding on ice.
Yeah.
So maybe to speed things up, maybe I'm going to go to the first keyframe and I won't have him walk off screen. I'll just have him like right here, insert a keyframe, and then I'll have this last keyframe still be in the shot, but like right here. So he's about to walk off frame. We'll see how that looks. That looks a lot closer. Another thing I'm noticing is, remember, when you do any keyframe, by default, there is a sort of like easing in and easing out motion between those keyframes. Like, so when he starts, it starts slow and then speeds up a little bit, and now he's at full speed. And then when he gets closer to the last keyframe, it kind of slows down to a crawl. Just like if we were to add like a cube here, and like animate here, and then here. It speeds up and then slows down to approach the next keyframe. And again, the way you augment that or change that is in the graph editor. So I'm going to go to the graph editor. Again, this is just how you see the expression of any motion. This is what we dealt with when we were working with our anticipation GIFs. So I'm going to choose, the only value that's changing right now is his Y location. He's just moving on the Y axis, but I could just choose everything in here. Because right now, all we're seeing in terms of keyframes are what I just added to his entire body, his location. Those keyframes that are like attached to his bones, they're hidden. Because I made those into a strip, those are no longer showing up in our dope sheet, which is great because we don't need to worry about those anymore. Those are done. Those are finished. And we can tweak those in the NLA editor. And now we're just looking at his like overall motion keyframes in our dope sheet and our graph editor. And it makes it a lot cleaner. So I'm going to go to my graph editor. And I'm going to choose just all of these first keyframes. And I'm going to go to key interpolation mode. The shortcut for this is T. And I'm going to choose linear. And that just makes it so it doesn't ease in or out of any motion. It's just like a straight from point A to point B, the same speed the whole time. Because that's all I'm really doing. I don't want it, because like his walk motion, it's not like he's like slowly starting to walk like that. He's got the same speed. The speed to his walk is uniform. So we want the motion of him moving through space also to be at a uniform speed for it to match, for it to sync up visually and to make sense. So now, from the beginning to the end of this sort of action we just created, his motion through space is now more synced up with the cadence of his step, the like sort of like speed of his step. I'm just going to change this to end at 180. And honestly, it looks like after he steps, if we wanted to be really fine-tuning, we can see that his foot kind of floats forward a little bit on the steps. So maybe it's like a little too fast. I can maybe move up the value for this Y. And that would be a little bit better. But now we have the boss sneaking around. What is he up to? So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to choose another animation for my character here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have him walk and maybe then come to a standing, sort of ambient standing motion. Or maybe some other style of walk. Maybe you'll start running. And we're going to download another version of him with a different animation baked onto it. We're going to import him into the scene, and we're just going to take the animation from that new model, apply it to what we have set up already, and then when we have two strips of different animations here, when we have two different animation strips of different actions, we can then fade between one into the other. Just like how you'd fade between a clip in Premiere. Like if you want to just like, fade from opacity and just like sort of transition between two different video clips, we're going to transition between two different NLA strips, two different animation clips. So I'm going to save. I'm going to go back to Mixamo. And let's choose a different, I'm going to go to the animations tab at the top because I like this character. I want it to be the same. Theoretically, you could just choose any character at this point and download the animation you want because we're really just going to take whatever, basically the rigs, the sort of bones for all these characters are essentially the same. Maybe we'll have him do some samba dancing. Yeah, that feels right. One thing about this dance, though, is that we can't make it, there's no option for it to be in place. So when I bring this animation in, there's sort of a limit to the time that this animation can sort of exist. And I specifically try to get people to stray away from using animations that don't have like an in-place option, just because it can kind of cause headaches a little bit. If it's like the last animation you're using in like a set of actions, and this is like the last thing he's doing, I'd say that it works. Let's see if there's any that have an option for in place. But this guy's already in place. So let's try this one. I'm going to download. I'm going to choose FBX again. So same character, chose a different animation, now I'm downloading that. And there's samba dancing. Again, the files are named after the action, so we have sambadancing.fbx. So going back to Blender, I'm going to go to File, Import, FBX, choose my samba dancing, hit OK. It'll take a second. Drink a coffee. Cool. So in our scene, we have two models now. We have our great boss, dancing and sneaking. But we were really just importing this Samba in order to have the animation that's linked to its bones. For some reason in Mixamo, you can't, maybe you can do it, and I just haven't figured it out, but you can't have multiple animations sort of attached to the same character. You have to download those animations separately. So we now have a Samba animation. What I'm gonna do to kind of like clean up my scene a little bit is while we have all of this guy selected, I'm gonna hit M to move this guy to a new collection. I'm gonna say new collection, call this Samba. And now in our outliner, we have a Samba collection or like layer, and I can hide that if I want. So he's still there, but I want him to be kind of just hidden from the scene. Or first I need to do something. So I'm gonna click on the bones for our Samba guy, and I'm gonna make sure I'm in the nonlinear animation window, the NLA window. And we see another set of keyframes that are not yet a strip. Remember when we first brought the sneaking model in, it would look like this. It was just sort of like orange strip with like little keyframes in it that are like black. And I'm gonna rename this. So I'm gonna rename this Samba. And then the next step is to click on this arrow here to turn it into a strip. Now I can hide my Samba guy. And if I choose my original dude that's just like sneaking, I can add that Samba dance strip to his bones. So if I go to add in the NLA window, add action strip, which is what this is, I can choose, it'll give me a set of options. I can choose Samba. Whoops. Huh, that's not working for some reason. All right. Let's try it again. Well, add tracks? No. What is it? What was a workaround for this? Add action strip Samba. No active tracks to add strip to. Select an existing track or add one before trying again. Add action strip Samba. Okay. All I had to do was just click on the sneak track. I just had to sort of like activate this window first. I don't know why. So I clicked on sneak. Let's do it again. Can I undo that and do it again? Yeah. So for some reason, if I go to add action strip, Samba, oh, I don't know, it's just working now. Anyways, just click on something before you say add action strip and choose your next thing. So now we have, save. Now we have a Samba track and a sneak track. And if we hit play, now the Samba is like on top of the sneak track. So it's sort of like canceling out the track beneath it. It's still moving, but now it's just like switching over to the Samba because the Samba track is above it.
So this works just as like the video clips in the timeline.
Yeah, it works very similar to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that Samba track towards the end here, and I want him to maybe get to like this point. Maybe I'll have him walk to the center here, and about at frame 90, I'm going to have him change to Samba. And again, sometimes I do this. This is maybe not helpful or not, but sometimes I'll add a marker in my timeline for when I know I want something to happen. So what I did is I can go to add marker. It's kind of like what we do to switch between cameras. I just went marker, add marker, and then I'm going to rename that marker and call it Samba switch. So now I know at frame 90, I want it to switch to the Samba dance. So I'm going to move this strip, and you can see when you move the strip, there's a little counter above it that just tells you where in the timeline it is, at what frame it's at. So I want it to be at 90, so I can just kind of move it right there. And I'm going to tweak the animation because I want him to stop moving at this point and start dancing. So at frame 90, I'm going to insert a keyframe for location. And then in my timeline here, I'm just going to delete that last keyframe so he doesn't keep moving after that. So now we have it pretty close. I mean, if you wanted to, and you didn't want to show the transition, you could just have a shot here, and then at the moment he switches, switch to a different camera, to a different perspective, you know? And it would be like, maybe I'll do that real quick. Let's have a different camera. Oops. So I could say, at that moment when he switches that animation, I could say, bind camera to that, switch to this camera. I selected the camera, went to marker, bind camera to marker, and then I'm going to go to frame 1, select my first camera, and say marker, bind camera to markers. So now if I hit the animation, shows him doing that, and then switches camera, and he's now dancing. So that was a workaround if I didn't want to have like a smooth transition between those things, but I still want to tell a story.
Well, there's a way to smooth it out.
There is definitely a way to smooth it out, and so I'm going to do that next. So like in Premiere, you have to sort of fade. To have like a smooth transition, you need to fade between these tracks. And let me find out where that is. That is...
So now here what we're going to do is we're not transitioning the object like the human itself, but the animation.
Yes, we're transitioning the animation that is a strip now, an animation that is attached to his bones. So we're going to, those animations that are attached to the bones that are controlling this man, we're going to say, once that second Samba clip comes in, it's going to slowly go from like 0 to 100. It's going to like fade in, and you'll see that his bones kind of slowly transition to the next set instead of like a hard sort of like cut, you know? So a way to blend in between these. If you select, I selected the Samba strip, and then, so before I was working in the action clip settings here where it said has playback for scale and like repeating. I'm going to go to active strip, and we have different settings for these strips, but I'm going to choose the Samba one, and I'm going to click on, there's an option that says auto blend in out. And so once I did that, if we zoom into this strip, we see this line here. And you see this in Premiere too when you're fading between clips. So what's happening here is that this beginning here, it's at 0. And we see over time, it's slowly transitioning to the Samba until the end, he's actually fully doing the Samba. But we want a faster transition. So when you click auto blend in and out, it basically automatically chooses, it looks at like where your strip is and what's below it. So I just moved this Samba strip over, and now we see that that line goes from here, and where this last sneak frame is where it fully completes the transition. So what I could do if I wanted to use the auto blend in and out, because I have this sneak track like repeating a lot, and really I wanted it to end a lot sooner. What I can do is I can go to the sneak. I can go back to its repeat settings, and if you notice when I move this down and then move this just to update. So all I did is like change the repeat of sneak so it's like at the point where I want this transition to end, and then I just moved the strip above it like back and forth, and it just sort of updated it. So now it gets there, and in like, let's see here, it's like, looks like 15 frames, transitions to the samba. You can manually choose how this transitions also. So if I go back to, if I choose samba and go to active strip, uncheck auto blend in and out, and I just move the blend in value up, you can see that little line is moving. So blend in is at the beginning of the strip, and how it blends out is at the end of the strip. So if I wanted that transition to be really quick, like 5 frames, that's what this value is in frames. You can kind of quickly transition to that, but maybe I want it to be like 12 frames. That looks a little bit more smooth. And you can add a lot of strips. You know, if you want to have a lot of different animations here, you could just kind of pile them on and like bring them in, rename that strip on the model you imported, create a little new collection for them so they're there, but you don't have to look at them. And then attach that strip to your original model, add it as an action strip, and you can just use these animations as clips, sort of to, or strips is what they call them in Blender, to have like a library of actions you can sort of fade in between and transition between. And again, like, you know, I just have this guy just walking in one direction through space. Perhaps your character is navigating a more complex world and needs to rotate, you know? So getting down the timing for like rotation and walking and like those sorts of things. You can get a little like tricky, like if your character is like walking down a ramp, that might look a little weird because like when you change the angle of your walking, your legs start to like, you know, respond differently. You know, like when you're like walking up something, you know, like your posture changes and stuff. So if you have a character walking down a ramp, it's just gonna be like that. So it might look a little, you know, weird. Yeah. Also, if you want to have them walk upstairs, don't even try to do that. That's really hard. But maybe there's a way, like if you want them to go upstairs, they can get to the base of the stairs, and then like you can change the camera angle so you don't see their feet when they're walking up the stairs. And then you can have a shot at the top of the stairs where they're already up there. So certain motions, like human motions, are highly articulated and are not going to be ones you can find on Mixamo. But I feel there's enough in there that like works to have like a palette to tell a pretty basic story with a human being, or a compelling one, really. One student from last semester like went nuts with this, and he had like this like maze, and there was this like ninja guy, and he was like, there's like a lot of like these action things, and he was like doing flips and like jumping over everything, but it was like hard to get the timing right to like transition between them because some of the jump animations like put them, you know, forward in space, so you kind of have to like rewind it and kind of like, so it can get a little complicated when you have a lot of like grand gestures or like high action sort of like jumping animations, but it's all doable. But yeah, so this is the sort of basic way to transition between. Let's see how it looks in the camera. Let's be real here. All right, let's add a ground to the world. because that looks better. Add a plane. What? Oh, I'm adding it in the Samba collection, which is invisible. Big. Now we have him moving, sneaking in, because he's nervous about dancing, and then he gets there, and he's dancing. Like, what do we got here? A few show seconds. It's like 6 seconds. I only had 24 seconds to do this, or to finish, you know? Yeah, of course, if this was my project, I want to put him in a place and make it interesting and light it and all that, but yeah, and I can post this, if it's helpful, I can post this project file up to the notes if you want to look at it.
Please.
Okay, I will do that. Also, maybe let's try, okay, so I also downloaded a, where is he? Muro.fbx. That was a dude called Old Man. What? Come on, what's going on here? Where's Old Man? So I went on Turbo Squid and I got Old Man. And this was a character that someone else used from last semester for the project. And I downloaded that because I know they got it to work on Mixamo. And I downloaded that as an FBX. And now I can go to Mixamo. And I want to say, upload a character. And it gives you some options. You can upload it as an FBX, an OBJ, or if it's a zip file containing either of those objects. But I have an FBX, so I can just drag that from the desktop and drop it into this window. And it takes a second for it to process. So they have this auto rigging sort of like wizard. So it says, for best results, have your character in T-pose and fingers spread apart. Use arrow buttons to rotate your character and have its front face forward. Essentially, it's saying, you know, just make sure that the model you just uploaded is looking at us. If I click on this, it rotates it. This character is kind of in a T-pose. It's not the best T-pose. Again, T-pose is this. This is T-pose. That's why when you're looking on Turbo Squid, you're like, why are all the characters like this? It's because this is a way to rig or add bones to a character so that, like, because when you're adding a bone to a character to rig it, like if I have a bone that's like in this arm here, if my body, if that arm is too close to this part of my chest, when it's like rigging, it's sort of automatically trying to guess the closest part of that body and put it and attach it to a bone. So if parts of the body are like too close to each other, maybe this bone will start pulling my like ribs out or something. So it's like a way to have those, like, it's a way to like be clear that like this bone is for this and that is not anywhere near this, and like, so this is the T-pose position. This guy is like a little too relaxed, so we'll see how that works. But you'll see some characters that have this because maybe that character isn't going to be doing like sort of like wild gesticulations or like shooting arrows or something. I'm going to say next because he's facing us. And then they have a very basic guide where, I don't know, the levels of detail, I didn't realize that. I guess they have different levels of detail. We'll just do standard, which I guess is the highest level. Use symmetry, leave that checked. Generally, the default settings are great. And it has a little image guide for how you want to place these markers. So we're just choosing this chin circle, and you have like a little window that shows you exactly where it's going. We're just going to place on the chin. And then it needs to be up like that. Like maybe in the middle of the chin, I feel like works better. Click on wrists. Choose the wrist zone. Elbows, that looks like an elbow right there. Knees, right here. Groin, right here. Next. So now it's like auto rigging. This takes, yeah, it takes a couple minutes sometimes. depending. It probably depends on how detailed the mesh is, how many polygons are in this character. If it's like a really low polygon character, it'll probably be faster. If it's like really complex, there's a lot of detail, it's going to take some time. I haven't had this process fail yet. But again, like most of the models you're downloading are already sort of optimized for animation. But if you download some weird model that some noob made that like, you know, is messed up, maybe it's not going to work. All right, processing. So they give you a little stock animation to show how it's like animated. What? And it looks pretty good. His chin is sort of like, it looks like he's wearing a rubber mask a little bit. And he's like, but I don't know. That works, I guess. Enable skeleton view. Nah. So if I hit next, you really, when you're working with Mixamo, they really just have you, they have like one slot for any character at a time. So I had that boss character sort of like loaded. So if you upload something, it asks you if you want to replace that with this new character. And I'm like, yes. And so we see with him, with the Samba action, see what I was talking about? Where his like arms were a little too close to his body. And now he's like a flying squirrel. And his like ribs are being broken every time he does a Samba dance. But this character was probably not designed to Samba dance. This character was probably designed to just like, he seems like a bad boy.
That's jumping.
So Sneak works kind of looks like his neck is broken still.
And also, you know, the behind his armpit, like something's hanging off.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, there's sometimes you'll see like a pack, or this one says Action Adventure Pack. So if you choose this, and then go to download, you're gonna get like 22 models with different actions that are all adventure-like. And right now it's just kind of cycling through those. I wouldn't suggest that because it's kind of like overkill, and it's good to like just sort of in place. Dummy. Like this one works okay. Again, his like face is like bright. So if I want to download this guy, same process. Get it as an FBX. This one didn't come with articulated textures. There should be a texture file in there somewhere. Yeah, it looks like there's some TGA. So from TurboSquid, if I wanted to add those textures on later, I could. And yeah, so I'm going to start the demo.